Hello, everybody. My name is Susana Ecclestone. I'm the board director at Future Ed and an executive director at Hall Garden & Company, but also executive director at the British Argentine Chamber of Commerce here in London. I thank everybody for the kind invitation to participate in this conversation about seamless execution of organizational strategies. I'm very pleased to be here. It's an honor, and I'm very happy to be here with my friend Abdul Nasir. And we will try to touch on a few strategies that organizations perhaps are already working on, but perhaps should look at, and to the changes that have happened in the last few months or years since and after the pandemic. So it's been my pleasure. It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you very much. And I let my colleague introduce himself.
Thank you, Susana, and I'm delighted to be part of the Fireside chat, where we're discussing about seamless execution of organizational strategy. So my name is Abdul Nasir Shaikh. Love being called Nasir. I'm the Group Chief Executive Officer of the Lexicon Group of Institutes, EduCrack and MultiFit. Very, very diverse in terms of what we do there, because we've got education, we've got EdTech, and we've got wellness and gyms per se. What we're going to try today together between Susana and myself is bring forth some thoughts on strategy that work for us, something that we've been seeing around. One of the things, Susana, that comes to my mind is, the whole heart of any strategy, of any organization is the teams, and the teams that we work with and the teams that are around us. How important is it to have diverse teams and inclusive teams as part of the strategy for the company?
Well, that's a great question. I'm a great believer in teams and in people. I mean, companies would not exist without the employees. So I think that is always, being at the core of, I have worked on different organizations and in different countries, and it's always about people that you have and how you nurture that. I have been lucky, first of all. I'm an Argentine living in London and who previously lived in the US. So I have been an immigrant for many years. So I know the importance of inclusion and how difficult it is sometimes to fit in different teams, taking into consideration cultural differences, languages, and everything else. Now, if companies embrace this, and I think they should, I know most companies do, it's all for their advantage. It's just a win-win situation, but it has to be at corporate level. There has to be an understanding of how relevant to the organization this is. I think you can see, perhaps, you will see more than me, the cases of companies that have been extremely successful at building these teams, international teams, and how to make them flow, effectively across borders.
Yeah, and that's so true. And sometimes it, in a way, bothers me that having a diverse and inclusive team is great. So if it is great and it has a win-win for everybody, why does it have to be on somebody's KRA? Why does it have to be measured? And why do we need to kind of keep a count on, is it happening or not? Why can't there be an ecosystem that it automatically happens and we have that play in place? Anybody you speak to, like we're speaking to the two of us today, and any of the leaders that you'll speak to, they'll say, yes, I want a diverse and inclusive team, because it adds different thought processes. It adds different perspective, mindsets, and in the whole, it gives me a winning combination. But if you'll notice on the balance scorecard of every leader, we'll end up finding DIE out there, DEI out there to be achieved as a goal. And I'll talk a little bit about back home a little bit. Whilst we've got a big focus at the moment on women in leadership. But my thought out there is, are we only talking about women in leadership in terms of numbers, or are we looking at substantial contribution out there? And are we doing enough to support the cause? And what about diversity beyond that is something that is a question that kind of lingers in my mind a lot. Is diversity only limited to women, or are we going to go beyond and accept and make an inclusive work environment on sexual preferences in terms of being specially abled? How are you going to go about that and make it more robust?
It's interesting what you're talking about, because you mentioned that, and I think that part of the problem is that this is heavy duty work, and in the ideal scenario, and then it would be, as you say, something that would not need to be measured. I mean, it would happen spontaneously. You would have all these groups coming together, but I mean, the reality is that it doesn't happen, and the reality is that for organizations, this is heavy duty work. And why? I think it's because they don't understand it. And I think it has to do with, they think they need to work on this because part of their strategy is not as seamless as they think it is.
True.
Because it does not naturally include these groups. So I think it has to do with, again, what is the vision of these companies as to how they want their workforce to look. I completely agree with you in the case of women groups, and I'm a woman, and I admire these women organizations and women-based organizations, but as a woman, I always wanted to have guys in my teams, and I never liked working only with women, and not because I didn't admire them or I didn't enjoy working with them. It has nothing to do with that. I think talent is sexless. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Different abilities, I mean, different backgrounds. I mean, it just, you need that kind of mix. If you don't have it, you're missing out on a lot of, add-ons that these people will bring to the company. So I completely agree with you. I think that other groups like, with different sexual orientations or different ethnicities, I mean, have come across and come together, and they do, great progress. But I'm not a great believer in waving the flag and isolating these groups into this.
Correct.
And this is what we do. I mean, this should be part of, a flow. So there shouldn't be a difference. But at the moment, I do feel there is, I hope it's part of the process that, they need to go through this stage so that eventually this happens. But the HR strategies of many companies are specifically directed and at targeting these groups, and which is very commendable, but that shouldn't happen, right? I mean, that should be completely part of their hiring process. It wouldn't have to be considered, or it wouldn't have to be measured, like you say, just checking the boxes, the minority box, the LGBTB box. I mean, all those boxes. You shouldn't need to do that.
And, you're so right. It should just be a seamless flow. The other element that keeps me, wondering and keeps me, in a way, always thinking is, how do I make my team more efficient? How do I drive efficiency as a strategy? Because, you've got a set number of hours, you've got a goal and a destination to kind of reach out to. And how do you kind of do that? So one of the things that works very well for me is shared accountability and shared responsibility. How there is a seamless integration of these two words and two actions, responsibility and accountability. And I try to drive that down completely from myself all the way to every member of the family who's working, every member who's working together in the team to do that. And we keep on, in a way, measuring ourselves on that. And we kind of include a tool called reverse mentoring to help each other kind of work together to move forward on that. Anything on efficiency that works for you, Susana?
Well, I have to say that the world has changed so much that you need to really adapt as to how you manage these teams. One of the things that you see and that you mentioned, which is absolutely true, is the mentoring part. The mentoring part, I mean, in many organizations doesn't happen. And I would say perhaps in most organizations. Why? Because they have no time. because the onboarding process is too fast, because the person just starts and they're, bombarded with tasks and different goals and, measurements and everything that they have to do. So that doesn't happen. So because it doesn't happen, there is no loyalty created to the company.
Correct.
There's no spirit of cooperation. There's no kind of vision as to where they're going. You can follow all the HR processes that you may think you want to follow, but people need to feel comfortable at work, and that is what has changed. I mean, the new generation is a very volatile generation that if they are not comfortable and feeling fulfilled, they have no specific loyalties to their companies, because
Correct.
they want to be happy and they want to professionally develop. And they, in the past, and perhaps your generation and mine, I mean, you would look for a job. Now that has disappeared.
Correct.
People are not looking for a job. And that is a challenge for any organization, because they have to target all these other needs the employees have that have nothing to do with the tasks they are assigned to do. So, and that is a lot of work. And we'll go back to, this is a lot of work, and it needs to be considered. So I don't know if you're familiar with the new terminology that just come up here. Is called the silent quitting. And it means
quitting. Yes.
I just don't like what I'm doing. I'm going to do the bare minimum and, just meet my targets, and I'm not going any further than this. This is a very dangerous, slippery slope. And it creates a mental, kind of disposition to work that is dangerous. And you don't want to have any employees working in that capacity. You may have all your tasks checked, but if you had an inspired employee, you would have 100 times more than that achieved by this person.
Correct.
So definitely, I mean, it's a very moving market and a very demanding market. So you need to adapt.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mention silent quitting. Because I think it's worse than the whole resignation spree that had come in, or the great resignation as they called it. It's worse than that, because here you have people who are not 100% engaged, and they are, they have taken the whole terminology of a minimum viable product to a different level by making it minimum viable service or minimum viable acceptance to kind of stay engaged. Also, the challenge comes in, when every word has a different meaning. In our time, experience meant the number of years we put in and everything that we kind of did around it. Now, for the new workforce, experience to a big extent is about what they go through and what is it that they're looking at much more beyond work. And hence, one of the most important strategies that I believe needs to come in play is cross-generational communication. Because every workforce today has multiple generations, at the minimum 3 generations working in one workforce. And the messaging from one to the other is completely different. So how do we kind of, ensure that you're getting out the words in the way exactly for the receiver to receive it the way you want it to be received is in itself a strategy, because, you may want to send a different note to each one and be mindful still that you're not in any way being offensive because of the way you're going about it. So that's another thought that comes to my mind when, we talk about cross-generational workforce and our strategies around that.
You mentioned that, and a friend of mine and a colleague of mine comes to mind. She's an expert on cross-generational education, and as a board director at Future Ed, one of our main goals or objectives is how we teach online to people that we don't know, we will not see, and come from everywhere, different ages, different backgrounds, different learning skills. And I think that is, something that a lot of organizations are looking at. I think that talking on that, you want to have a diverse generational team. because you need that. But that is a challenge because the new generations, I mean, work very, very differently. And, you know, they have technology against you if you think of, you know, an older generation. And that is a big complication. And, you know, added to that, you can think, okay, now you have international teams working remotely on different time zones with different technological skills, and with learning or processes because it's part of their culture. So, you know, and different languages. So if you add all that plus the generational piece, so you have a really difficult, complicated situation. But and I think that has to be put on the table. If you have, say, an agile team that is working remotely, you have 20 employees working in 5 or 6 different countries, you would have that on top of the agenda. Say, look, everybody does things differently. This is what we need. This is what we have to achieve. Where are the gaps that we need to cover? Say technology, learning specific skills, I mean, that have to do with that. But also understanding we have an older group of people, and I'm not being derogatory by saying older, but, you know, just also say wiser, or you know, more experienced, who work at a different level or with a different set of skills. Nobody wants to talk about that. I mean, I don't know if you have seen a lot about this, but I haven't, and I think it should be more on the table.
Yeah, I think we don't talk about it enough. You know, similar to mental health, I think this is another topic that needs to be really talked about a lot more, brought a lot more on the table, because they're so interconnected. You know, because a lot of frustrations, a lot of energy suppression happens because these conversations don't happen. And because these conversations don't happen, it ultimately kind of starts impacting the mental health of an individual. So I completely agree with you, Susana. We need to be more forthcoming, talk more about it. And, you know, the amount of solutions that will come in when we have these conversations, I think will be phenomenal. You know, one of the tools, sorry, I think Susana.
No. I was going to say, no, I completely agree with you. You know, the issue with the mental health topic is that it's too broad. Right. What is mental health? I mean, what? I mean, you have a million different scenarios under the mental health umbrella. So if you say, okay, we are touching as a company, we're touching on the mental health of our employees, on what? On the overload of work, on the pressure of work, on their personal problems, or different situations that they would have personally at home. So that is the challenge, because it's just too broad, it's too complicated. And how do companies tackle this? You can have the best strategy, but you will have to go down into every single employee of yours that has a specific issue, because you would not be able to cover all these areas under one umbrella of mental health. Correct. So, I mean, that requires, I mean, extreme awareness and a very clear goal from the company to say, okay, how are we tackling this? What do we have in our workforce that we need to look at? Traumatize people. You're looking at all these war zones. I mean, like, you have employees working in the Ukraine right now, and you think of, how can this person do his job at the moment when they're in the middle of a war? So, you know, it is obviously nothing that we will resolve today, but I think is worth mentioning.
Yeah, I think elements like that. One of the things that, you know, when it comes to efficiency, when it comes to other elements of strategy that I think needs to be used more is technology. And I know that, you know, with you doing what you do at Future Ed, you know, we've got a fantastic platform called EduCrack, which is into EdTech and helping children, you know, crack competitive exams through technology. Seamless integration of technology in day-to-day work can really help both in strategy and efficiency. You know, the amount of data that you can kind of collect and let the machine, you know, do the analysis for you, give you thought processes, give you statistics out there, can work well for you. Any thoughts that come in your mind? And, you know, after that, I'll share an example how it's worked for me.
One of the aspects that we look at Future Ed is based on this need and this reality is what happens with the groups of professionals or adults who don't have access to technology or who have difficulty accessing technology.
Right.
Because, you have, millions of people who would have millions of different talents, but they don't have the connectivity, they don't have the resources, the infrastructure to say, okay, well, I will connect into this program, or I will just do this remotely, or will take this job from, the middle of Guatemala, because they just cannot do that physically. Beyond the part that they could perhaps, they do have the skills, but, the technical parts. So I think that has to be something that, needs, as part of our project, is just how do we reach out to these young professionals, in these remote areas, or groups that have been kind of put aside or are not included, in different countries, say, Aboriginal groups or any other kind of separated group that, could be found in other countries. Resources, people with limited resources, isolated areas, whatever. So I'm all with you on this. I do agree that, technology is something that we will not be able to live without. But I think there are a lot of limitations right now as to the simple infrastructure that we need for this, the education. For young professionals to move along with what's happening, and a lot of talent is left behind because of this. So yes, it's an inclusive tool, but at the same time it's an exclusive
tool. Yeah.
Because if you don't have it, you don't belong.
Correct.
And you're missing out on everything. So I think it's very tricky. I wouldn't put all the chips on technology itself. I would put the chips on how do you reach out, or how do you, make contact with these people in all these countries? Because going back to, international teams, you may want a team, I don't know, in Singapore or any other place, and you think, okay, do they have the connectivity that I need? Do they have the computer that they need, the laptop?
And you say it correctly, right? The term is accessibility. How do we make technology accessible? And a classic example comes to my mind. During the pandemic, we've got in India, you've got both an urban and a rural zones, like anywhere in the world. And this is where I found that the proactiveness of teachers, who kind of were both accountable and responsible to the learning bit, where they created zones during the pandemic where people could kind of come together with proper social distancing, be there, and were able to bring technology to the homes. So in gauntlets, small zones, so they kind of got across an iPad or a tab into a community where there were 8 or 10 houses, and they were able to then deliver their online classes from that. And the stories from the pandemic of how people have made education inclusive is phenomenal, even with the challenges of technology not being there. But I think, you mentioned a very apt point. We need to see how we can take technology to every home, make it more accessible. And I think that's where a lot of big corporates and the governments will kind of come in play. So back in India, we've got a big push on a digital India, on a technology focused India, where we are looking at getting technology into every home to ensure that, nobody is left behind. And, I was going to share an example for you, how, one of the ways we've been able to seamlessly make technology work for us is actually in our learning strategies, especially, with our diverse workforce that is there and working all around, taking technology to them, creating learning maps, learning progresses and learning achievements, and then creating new journeys beyond that. And I think that's worked phenomenally well because the team members have seen the investment that is going into them and are able to measure that because it's right in front of them in terms of a dashboard. So when tomorrow somebody says, you've really not done training for me, you've got a dashboard out there says the amount of training that they've done. We also kind of used a buddy process where you learn and then you get certified to become a buddy trainer. Then you work
Mm.
with that person and you get reward points in return. So you've got an ecosystem that is rewarding you for learning and helping others learn. I thought I'll share
Yeah.
that with you as a
Yeah, that's a great model because going back to you rely on your people, and
right.
this is what you started the conversation with. I mean, like you just cannot do any of these things without your people, and that's what you need. And I completely agree with you. I think that the pandemic was an equalizer on this because I think it affected developed countries and not so much developed countries in the same way because it targeted a gap in the technology education that went, I mean, all over the world. So you would say, okay, well, it didn't matter you lived in Hong Kong or you lived in Argentina or Latin America or India. You had a group of people and a big groups in many cases that could not catch up, I mean, with this situation. And they were not prepared. Many of them were prepared, and which was great. I mean, because we know that a lot of organizations were ready and they just made the switch in no time. In the educational sector, I mean, many universities were ready, but most universities were not. Schools, primary schools, secondary schools, I mean, like some of them were, but most of them were not. And then you have the teachers. Obviously, I'm talking about this particular sector, right?
Right.
Um, Going back to the inter or cross generational workforce that you might have, we have an older group of teachers who had never worked with this technology, who would have to jump on these technologies really quickly, who didn't have the training, they didn't have the tools because the tools were not available. I mean, the learning tools were not available, but they also didn't have the time to take the learning tools because they were teaching already. So you have all these wonderful modules, and you would have teachers that, look, I'm working, 10 hours a day, 15 hours a day, doing Zoom lessons with my students. I cannot do this learning tool right now. So it just put every single process on the map, and then you think, okay, this is where this is failing. And I think that it was terrible. It was great at the same time. It was really educational, and a lot of companies learned, some didn't.
Correct.
But in the end, I think it was everybody is in the same boat, and it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter who you are, you had to make changes. And that was a great takeaway from these last 2 years, because I think it affected every single organization in some way, and force them to rethink the use of technology, the accessibility to technology, and going back to what you're saying, the cross-generational groups that you had. Because before this, nobody has thought about that, I
True.
think. I mean, so yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's been really interesting. But sometimes the tool itself doesn't work. You need everything else to make it work.
Yeah.
So it is just, it's part of thinking in a comprehensive way. I mean, and sometimes that is what organizations lack. They give you the tools, they don't implement them properly, they don't have the mentorship programs that you are suggesting. How do we put this in motion? I mean, who do we use? Well, you will have to use your people, because your people know your company. So who
Correct.
are you going to use? I mean, if you're going to use someone who's outside from your organization, you will have a lot missing in that communication process, because they will not know your culture, the way you do things, your teams. I'm not saying it would not be effective, but perhaps it would not be so effective or as effective.
I think you're bang on. And, you brought out an important point on how things can't work in isolation, and how it has to all be brought together and kind of flow together.
Yeah.
The legs need to walk together, the wheels need to roll together. And it's so important. And each of these elements needs to come in play. But the other eye, which is innovation, I think that's something that's really taken a boost in the last 2, 3 years, because with all the adversity with all the obstacles that we were thrown out during the pandemic, I think we turned, and I think globally, I think the humankind used this time to turn adversity to advantage, turn obstacles to opportunity. And the amount of startups and unicorns that have come in through this period is phenomenal. And if somehow every workplace has a innovation starter or an innovation mindset focus, where there are people in a way who are responsible, other than the senior leadership, a lot of obviously things fall on the shoulders of the senior leadership. But how do you make innovation a way of life in every organization, and people encouraging that, people driving that, people pushing for that, is something that's going to be a key factor in which companies do better than others, which companies end up becoming great versus just being good. Because with everything that's coming across today, you need to come out with an innovative strategy to give you the edge against the others. I'll share a simple example to you. We in one of our companies, where we are engaging with postgraduate students who are doing their MBA, we came up with a strategy during that time where we were able to bring people together onto one platform, was by creating an onboarding mentoring program. So when a student takes admission to the time the person joins in to college, which is sometimes the length is as good as 4 or 5 months, we brought in a mentoring program where each student is assigned a mentor. They work together with their development, and at the same time have a learning map of around 3 to 4 certifications that they do before they come on, get on into their classes. This, in a way, keeps them connected with their college, gets them to know people, and more importantly, prepares them for the journey that they're coming through. And sometimes it's as simple as that, where technology, that's the virtual teaching that comes in place, the human connect of mentoring, and where technology and the emotions come together to create a great mix of synergies for helping you win.
Yeah, and then you in that combination, you also include the cultural element and
Correct.
the person approach. I completely agree with you. I mean, that is, if the organization manages to maintain that on schedule, and as I said again, then emergencies come, and forget about the mentoring program. You need to do this, but if you manage to stick to that plan, I think that's really efficient. In my experience, what happens is the reality of the workloads sometimes kind of clouds all this with other tasks, and it gets really complicated. But yeah, in the ideal scenario, this is exactly what it should look like. Now, the other thing is that you think about, I mean, I always think that, how companies communicate with their employees at all levels. Because if you look at processes, and then you have, a younger generation doing something, I mean, I'm thinking of manual work right now, but it doesn't need to be, doing a process, an automatic process that, they have been doing for some time. And then they think, well, perhaps this should be, I mean, done in a different way. We could do this and, perhaps kind of optimize that a little bit. Because they come from a generation that thinks completely differently and, looks at technology in a different way. Companies should be able to have this conversation from the bottom up and, instead from the top down, because that is where you get, the real life situation, and the real life experience of the worker doing the job. But obviously it doesn't have to be manual work, it could be anything, but perhaps it's easier to just picture it like that. And I think that's where, you go back to this generation that is, completely, technology oriented, help out on the processes. But then you would have to just take into consideration your social skills and your human element, because as we know, I mean, this focus on technology has created a complete lack of soft skills, social skills, and any other of, the skills that you need to work in a fluid environment.
Correct.
So you will have a completely educated technology user who cannot talk to a colleague, I mean, having a coffee in the cafeteria. So that is what I think is a danger at the moment. And I would look very carefully at how, this is managed by companies. I know there's a serious gap in soft skills at the moment. And that is something that I'm not sure if these companies are extremely aware. At the end of the day, you need to sell a product, you need to sell services. And so you need to have people who are capable of talking to colleagues, creating a conversation. So that is not machine led. So I think that is something that, technology plays against, but there has to be a focus on that type of education, or focus from organizations.
Our listeners today would be very cross with us if we closed our conversation without talking about sales and revenue and a couple of
Okay.
business models that work for us in terms of strategy. So, when it comes to demand generation or sales, one of the things that as a strategy I tell my marketing team is that, you need to talk about what your audience wants versus what you want to sell. A lot of times when the marketing strategy is being done or the marketing team is putting forward their thought process, they are putting it forward from their perspective. What is it that they want to sell to the people? What is their product and how good their product is? And from my experience over the years, sometimes that doesn't resonate with the audience. So I keep on giving them as a strategy, listen, is what your communication that you are doing today, is this what the consumer wants? So we try to frame our marketing strategy, our communication strategies based on what the audience wants. And that's something that, has worked for us. I thought I'll share that as a tip. And the other thing that really works well for me is a model that I work with. It's called Bridge, where B stands for bringing everybody together. Now, this is where I mean all different stakeholders, be it my team, be it the person who's buying your product or services out there, the user, and the people related to the users, and of course the promoters and the investors in that. So bringing everybody together on one platform. R is relearning from unlearning. I think unlearning is a very important element that one has to play with today. You cannot sit with the knowledge that you had yesterday. You need to unlearn and then again relearn to the current requirement that is there. I is something that I use multifold, is where required, and more often than not is the emphasis on integrity and keeping on pushing the importance of integrity with the team. But I also use I for innovation with the team and tell them, this is something that we could work with. In D, it is a lot about diligence. One of the things that is important to me from a perspective of the teams is understanding that we need to diligently be working towards our destination. There are no shortcuts. There is smart work, there are a lot of other tools that you have, but there has to be diligence that you bring in. G is about generating revenue, because if the top line is not coming in, if we're not able to kind of get the monies in, you'll always have different challenges that come across, which may include cost cutting, cost optimizations, and all those elements. And to make a company grow, you need to ensure that the revenue is being generated. And lastly, E, it's about emotional intelligence and emotions. Keeping in mind that you work closely with the emotions of the team that you have, your customers, the people. Be sensitive towards that. And this is a model that works very, very well with me, and has kind of shown results. So I thought, that's something that I'll share with the audience.
Well, it's fantastic. I mean, and it sounds like right on point. I always say selling is the most difficult of all talents, and I admire salespeople. I mean, any kind of level of sales, I mean, is extremely admirable for me, because you need to create a need. You need to create, I mean, if you don't want it, how do you convince someone who doesn't want it, I mean, to buy it, if that is the case? And what you are saying is that you create this kind of awareness. Well, I really need this thing now that you mention it. And that is tough work. And it's not just about selling a product, because, you know, you can sell a product today, or perhaps you don't sell it today, but you sell it in 3 months because they remember you, because you made an impression on that person and say, hang on a minute, I met someone 3 months ago and they had a product. And, you know, at that moment I couldn't buy it, but I think that I want it now. You need to make sure that you are remembered as a salesperson, regardless of your product, because the products come and go. I mean, you know, you can be selling one thing today, you're selling another thing tomorrow, but the good salesperson will sell anything if they believe in it, because saying you need to believe in your product. If they have the proper training as to how this product works, they understand it, which you see many times that is not the case. You go to a shop and you want to buy a t-shirt and they look the other way and you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, you need to be selling the t-shirt to me. Why are you looking the other way? I just walked in your store. Or they say something like, because it happened to me last week, so, oh, that is too expensive. I said, how do you know if I can afford it? Or that is too small. You're not going to fit in that. So that's for me. I mean, maybe for my daughter, or perhaps I want to wear it, and even if it's tight, I don't care. It seems to be very basic, but it's crucial. And it has to do with the culture of not understanding how you sell a product. And how you entice your customer. I mean, how do you get this person to come to your shop or to your company and not to another one? And it goes back to what you are describing, which is extremely clear. But I agree with you. But it goes back to the very beginning when we spoke. You need to train your employees. You cannot expect anybody to be selling anything if you don't tell them how you want it to be sold. What is your goal? Just numbers? You just want to sell this product, or you want your name to be remembered as the producer of this product, which is so great? Because products will, change. I mean, you will discontinue some things and then you will make other things. So is it a product, or is it your brand, or is it your company? So how do you sell? It's a very complex skill that requires, it's not just us adding numbers. I'm always thinking of the passive buyers, the ones who don't buy your product because they don't need it, they don't want it, it doesn't work, but they will talk to someone else and they will say, oh, you know what? I know someone who sells that.
Correct.
How do you make that impression on a person who doesn't want your product? I think that is the end result. And sometimes the numbers don't reflect the impact that you're making on the customer.
So true.
It was
lovely
wonderful
connecting with you, Susana. And
thank you very much. It was really, really nice. And thank you for DLC for inviting us. I mean, it's been a pleasure. And I hope that people enjoy this conversation. And obviously, there's a lot more to talk on this topic, but just creating awareness on a few aspects of perhaps we can make a small contribution from our side.
Absolutely. We'll stay connected. You take care, and thank you for catching up with Susana and me, Nasir. Until next time, see you later.